Roy Williams is a marketing man. His clients want to buy whatever advertising sells the most product.
It's Rick Dees in the morning. All communication should be poetic. Bring him in, please. Roy Williams!
Essential to any company is the ability to get your message out. My guest says, don't give up hope. Joining me now is Roy Williams.
Yes, so how do you speak in poetry to people and get them to do things you want them to do?
Here to talk about the advantages of radio advertising is the author of a new book called The Wizard of Ads.
Joining me is Roy Williams. Today we're talking about his book, Secret Formulas of the Wizard of Ads. This is one of the most important books that anybody can read.
What makes people do the things they do? More importantly, how can we get people to do what we want them to do? With another part of the answer to that question, here's the Wizard of Ads, Roy H. Williams.
We're going to talk about branding. Now, I have to tell this story, but I was researching to include a chapter on branding in my book, Secret Formulas of the Wizard of Ads, and I'm flying home from Chicago during that window of time. And seated next to me was a woman who worked at a very large computer company. And I knew this because it is my custom and my habit when I sit down on a plane to turn to the person next to me and say, are you headed to work or are you headed home? And then they usually tell me one or the other, and I say where I'm headed, and then that's the end of the conversation. I read my book, they read theirs, but we've kind of broken the ice. In this case, I said, you headed to work or you headed home? And she said, well, I'm headed home. And I said, me too. She said, yep, I work for, she named the computer company. I said, oh, really? That's a great company. She said, yep, I'm in the marketing department. I said, really? She said, yep, I've been up in Chicago at the unveiling of the new $14 million branding campaign that our ad firm has created for our new line of servers. Well, now I closed my book, put it in the little pocket in the seat in front of me, and I said, oh, really, branding? What is that exactly? And she said, and I'm not making this up, quote, evidently, branding has something to do with always using the same 3 colors in all of your brochures and magazine ads and product packaging. And I said, same 3 colors, huh? Yeah. Well, I stood up in the aisle, as I'm prone to do. As a matter of fact, if you ever hear stories about some horrible, tacky, rude thing that Roy Williams did, I'm probably guilty as charged. And I'm not proud of that, but these things just come over me. And I jumped up in the aisle and I said, ma'am, do you see this right here? She said, yes, please sit down. And I said, no, you need to learn this move because very soon you're going to go back and you're going to gather everybody together from the whole company and you're going to take them out on the lawn and you're going to teach them this move because very soon you're all going to line up on the seashore and wave goodbye to your $14 million as it floats away over the horizon on the tide of stupidity. And ma'am, I mean that in the nicest possible way. Now, I want you to remember the mental image that I used to describe to her what was going to happen to her $14 million. And I said, by the way, what's your background? How did you get into marketing? She said, well, actually, I'm an electrical engineer. They just put me in marketing. I learned 2 things. Yes, most companies do assume that marketing is just creativity. Just get one of them creative people. It's kind of creative. Put them in there. And if you really stink as an engineer, but you're a nice person, they'll stick you in marketing. And is that a pretty accurate assumption? I think probably so. I'm thinking to myself, this is why most marketing in America sucks like a Hoover. It's why it is so utterly counterproductive. It's why it's so incredibly stupid and ill-advised. Now, she said, you really don't think it's going to work? And I said, oh, no, I don't think it's not going to work. I know it's not going to work. She said, why? This is a reputable ad firm. And I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, what career did they wash out of to get stuck in marketing? And I mean that in the nicest possible way. Now, branding. What is branding really? And do you know who won the Nobel Prize for discovering branding? The Nobel Prize for discovering it? in 1904? Ivan Pavlov. Remember the story of Pavlov and his dog? Pavlov rubbed meat paste on the tongue of a dog and rang a bell. And he did this day after day after day after day until the dog began to associate the sound of the bell with the taste of the meat. Now, you've heard the term conditioned response. Forget that term. The term is branding. Now, when the dog began to associate the sound of the bell to the taste of meat, all Pavlov had to do was ring the bell. The dog would begin to salivate even though there was no meat. Congratulations, branding is born. Now, let's look at the three elements that create branding. Branding is simply this. In psychological terms, it is the implantation of an associative memory. The implantation of an associative memory. Pavlov implanted a memory of the taste of meat, and he associated it with the sound of the bell. He implanted an associative memory in combination with a recall cue. Now, what is an associative memory? Well, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. Everybody's sitting there, I'm singing, everybody's like bobbing their head in unison. You're singing it silently in your mind. In a large crowd, I'll very often ask, how many people are thinking of Mary Poppins right now? Now, I didn't say that phrase with the cadence or the rhythm or the melody that it's sung in the movie, just a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. All you have to do is say a spoonful of sugar, and 2/3 of all Americans will immediately be thinking of Julie Andrews with an umbrella flying across London as Mary Poppins. That is an example of an associative memory. You see, an associative memory is simply a memory which has become linked to another memory. Our job in advertising, if we understand it, is to create such associations, to link certain memories to other memories, so that when your prospective customer has need of your product or service, that the memory is triggered and they immediately think of you and of your product and of your service because it's associated to that need. Create the link so that your advertiser is the one they think of first and the one they feel the best about. Now, what's a recall cue? It's a mental trigger. A recall cue is a mental trigger that will prompt a reader, listener, or viewer to take a prescribed action at an appointed time. How is the action prescribed? It's something they have seen themselves do in their imagination. The human creature can take no action until they have seen themselves do it in their mind. You want to cause them to see themselves taking the action you want them to take. You want them to see it in their mind, and you want to associate that memory to the name of your advertiser, his product or service. Is this beginning to make sense? Now, there are 3 keys, as I said before, to implanting such associative memories into the mind. Everyone gets the first 2 keys instinctively. Everyone misses the third one. It's the third one that's important, but let's look quickly at the 2 that everybody gets instinctively. The first of these is consistency. Pavlov never offered food without ringing the bell, and he never rang the bell without offering food. Consistency. Now, what's the difference between consistency and predictability? We said earlier that Broca's area of the brain. Broca hates predictability, but consistency is essential to successful advertising. This is the difference. The consistency, or let's say the lack of consistency. There was a campaign a number of years ago. Less filling, tastes great. Less filling, tastes great. Remember the beer campaign? The Jocks in Bars campaign. Now, at the same time that campaign was launched, about 14 years ago, there was another campaign launched, and less than 1% as much money was spent. Less than 1% as much money. But they were consistent. You see, the beer campaign evolved into a series of at least 6 other major campaigns in the past 14 years with no consistency whatsoever. They were not joined together in any way. Utterly inconsistent. They would get halfway up the mountain, and then they would come back down to the bottom and start all over with a brand new campaign that had no relationship to the investment they had made up to that point. Stupid, 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 stupid. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. What the other little company did is they said, you know, we have so little money that we're just going to have to always make sure that every ad is connected to every other ad so that people remember these ads as a group. We're going to use this violin music and kind of an unusual voice. We're going to every penny we have in the world in one medium, and we're always going to close by saying, we'll leave the light on for you. Less than 1% is much money, but for 14 consecutive years, Tom Bodette has been telling us that at Motel 6, he'll leave the light on for us. Now, wait a minute. Why was it not predictable? Because you know about 3 seconds of that 60-second ad is the violin intro, and the sound of Tom Bodette's voice is instantly associated to the memory of the Motel 6 and the humor and the wit and the style of that ad. And you know he's going to tell you at the very end he'll leave the light on for you, but the reason it's not predictable is because for the 57 other seconds of that 60-second ad, you have absolutely no idea in the world what he's going to say. And you always turn up the radio. Now, consistency, Motel 6, genius. Inconsistency, over 100 times more money. The beer company, and you'll spend the rest of the afternoon trying to figure out what the other 6 campaigns were, none of which were particularly memorable because about the time they built a little consistency, they abandoned them. Now, the first key is consistency. Pavlov didn't ever offer food without ringing the bell. He never rang the bell without offering food. Tom Bodette never failed to tell us he would leave the light on for us. See, Pavlov did this day after day after day. He did not come out at the end of 6 or 8 weeks and say, this ain't working. I must be reaching the wrong dog. No, see, Pavlov understood. It was the right dog. It's just that Rome wasn't built in a day. Pavlov understood that implanting an associative memory took time. Pavlov understood, yes, I'm doing the right thing, even though I see no result yet. He stuck with it. Now, wait a minute. Our computer company, with a consistent and frequent use of those 3 colors, they met keys 1 and 2, did they not? But I said they would wave goodbye to their $14 million as it floated away over the horizon on the tide of stupidity. Now, why? Why did I use that mental image? Because the third key, ladies and gentlemen, is anchoring. When implanting an associative memory, the recall cue, in the case of Pavlov, the recall cue was a bell, must be associated with an anchor, a memory which is already anchored in the mind. You must associate the recall cue with something that's already in the heart of the dog. In this case, it was the dog's love for the taste of meat. You see, frequency and consistency create branding only when your message is tied to an already established emotional anchor in the heart of the customer. Pavlov's branding campaign was anchored to the dog's love for the taste of meat. If the dog did not already love meat, the frequent and consistent ringing of the bell would have produced no response other than to irritate the dog. Now, how often have you heard someone say, I hate advertising? You see, to have rung the bell consistently and frequently, when the bell was not tied to anything the dog cared about, just would have pissed off the dog. The dog would have said, I hate advertising. Why, dog? Because it's never about me. It's never about anything I care about. It's always about some knucklehead, their street address, their phone number, their store hours. Wah, wah, wah. Hey, here's 35 cents. Call someone who cares. Is your recall cue, slogan, positioning statement, logo, tied to an anchor in the heart of your customer? Or are you just irritating the dog? You see, in 1994, Penny and I were flown to London as the guests of De Beers. As you know, De Beers singularly controls the world diamond market. De Beers has more money than most countries. And they wanted me to speak to all the jewelers of the United Kingdom, England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. An amazing experience. We spent a week in London and spoke for an hour or so. But of course, everyone's expecting me to say, the 4 sacred C's: cut, clarity, carat weight, and color. But I didn't do that. They said, Roy, tell us how these clients of your firm, you work with a number of jewelers across the nation, and they're all extraordinarily, ridiculously, ludicrously rich as the result of this advertising and marketing. And all of them started little, tiny, insignificant jewelers, and now they are the richest and most powerful jewelers in America. Tell us how you did it. And I said, well, the first thing we did was never, ever describe the diamond. I go, what? Yeah, because see, people don't really care that a diamond is the hardest substance in the world. Nobody wakes up, rubs their eyes, and says, you know, what I need today is some cut, color, clarity, and carat weight. That's what I need. A way to start a good ad for a jewelry store, if you want to speak to the taste of the meat in the heart of the dog, you say, she'll kiss you like you've never been kissed before. The dog goes, whatever that is, I'll take two. He has no idea it's an ad for a jewelry store. But you've touched something that matters to the customer. You see, the reason all these jewelers are so extraordinarily successful is because we understood something. We said, you know, the only reason anybody buys a diamond is because they're imagining the reaction of the woman they love. He's imagining that look on her face. Why does a woman wear a diamond? Because she's imagining the look on the faces of everyone else she knows. Her friends, neighbors, co-workers, and family. She's imagining everyone grabbing her hand and going, is that real? Describe the reaction. You'll sell the diamond. Speak to the felt need. Speak to what matters in the heart of the customer. And the easiest sale you can possibly imagine is to sell a man on the positive reaction of the woman he loves. Now, wait a minute. This is not hard. What kind of a moron is going to describe the diamond? The diamond has nothing to do with anything. And it's kind of like, hey, don't try to justify intellectually a decision that is entirely emotional. There's just no logic in spending $10,000 or $20,000 for a rock someone dug out of the dirt. What you're really paying for is her reaction. So, are your ads answering questions that no one is asking? Most ads do. To create successful branding, you must tie your identity to an emotional anchor which is already known to elicit the desired response. If you make such association with consistency and frequency, branding will occur. But don't expect too much too soon. It takes a lot of repetition to train the dog to salivate at the sound of your name.
That's the end of tape 2. We'll see you again with more from the Wizard of Ads Academy.